Chapter 9. Parker felt a little nervous, which was ridiculous. He had already introduced Adriana and her family to his mother Dottie. After he had returned Adriana, her mother, and her sisters to their room, Parker had gone back to have a chat with his mother. He knew Dottie would want to go over how the introduction had gone. Dottie had been surprisingly supportive. She said she liked Adriana, and as long as his future mother-in-law was housed nearby, but separately with the sisters, Dottie thought it would work out. Parker had been pleasantly surprised. It had been a gamble to have an overseas bride, more so than he originally thought it might be. He was glad Adriana seemed nice and had made an effort with Dottie. It was true his bride-to-be was young and shy, but hopefully over time she might warm up to his family. Now he was about to introduce her to everyone. His brothers, the other soon-to-be brides, his aunts, and his cousins. There were a lot of people who would be making Adriana's acquaintance, and Parker wasn't sure how she was going to handle it. Perhaps she would be overwhelmed by all the attention. For some reason, it made Parker feel even more protective of her. It was an odd feeling. Normally, he was all for equal rights and dated strong women who knew exactly what they wanted and had the drive to get it. Now he was forced into a bit more of a traditional role. Parker found he didn't overly mind it. Iona and Christina wouldn't be attending the dinner. All the Rameslys children had been corralled by some staff for their own dinner and playtime afterward. Kelly's half-brother Josh, Dylan's son Caden, and Caden's friend Cece were unofficially in charge with the staff to oversee the fun. Parker had managed to convince Adriana's mother and numerous uncles that Iona and Christina would be well supervised and have fun with their soon-to-be relatives. It had not been an easy discussion, but Parker had been rewarded with smiles from the two girls when they realized they could have fun with kids near to their own age and skip all the boring adult talk. Parker hoped everything would go okay. He really didn't want to get on his future mother-in-law's bad side. Not that he would understand a word she said. However, it would put Adriana in an uncomfortable position, which Parker would rather spare her. Now Parker was respectfully leading Adriana and her mother to the reserved area in the restaurant of the hotel. The uncles had elected to have a night on the town since they were temporarily relieved of their responsibility to the females in the family. Parker supposed Adriana's mother was chaperone enough. Some of the family had already arrived. Ben and a girl Parker didn't know. Parker didn't know why he was startled. He supposed because Ben had never brought a date along to family events before. His cousin had lost some weight as well. Good for him, thought Parker. Jake and Sterling were there, talking to Gabe. It was a pity Gabe and Brittany weren't tying the knot tomorrow. Parker thought the two of them might either be made for each other or would drive each other to madness. Either way, it would have been interesting to watch their lives unfold. Unfortunately, things had not gone well with the couple, and Gabe had given his spot at the altar to Jake and Sterling. As Parker understood it, Jake and Sterling had planned to get married, but their cousin Nate's death had happened. The funeral had taken priority. Then Sterling had some issues at home with her parents' business. Finally, they were going to be wed. Parker hoped the best for them. He pulled out chairs for Adriana and her mother. He gave his own mother, Dottie, a kiss on the cheek before taking his own seat. "Have you seen Marshall?" questioned Dottie. "He called me to say that he would be here, but might run a little late. He had a last-minute surgery."
"You know how these things can go," replied Parker. "It could be hours, depending on how things turn out."
Dottie sighed. "I haven't met his bride yet. I was hoping to before the wedding."
"Perhaps she'll be here before Marshall is,"
shrugged an unconcerned Parker. He gave a distracted nod to the waiter, who placed the pre-ordered dinner in front of him.
"I can text him to see if he's on his way."
"Thank you." Dottie smiled past him to Adriana. "What a lovely dress, Adriana. You look very nice this evening." Adriana blushed. She gave a tentative smile to Dottie. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." Parker quickly jotted a text to Marshall, asking if he was going to make it to dinner.
"Hey, no phones at the table,"
remonstrated Max in a happy tone.
"That's right. No phones or other distractions,"
agreed Everett, taking a sip of water. No phones? Whispered Kitty to Ben. Ben nodded.
Something about being present in the moment. It's a family rule when we get together, there's no technology at the table. You are the reason for that rule, noted Parker to Ben. Growing up, Ben was always ignoring everyone and tapping away at some device. You still have your phone out, yet mine is firmly off and put away, Ben mildly pointed out. What is so important? Wondered a frowning Gabe. I was texting Marshall to see if he was going to make it to dinner, explained Parker. Mom asked me to. Sure, blame your phone use on Aunt Dottie, dryly remarked Noah.
I did ask him, admitted Dottie.
Hey, has anyone met Marshall's bride yet? Questioned Max. Do we know anything about her?
Parker found a lot of people suddenly interested in the conversation and looking to him.
I know nothing other than Marshall has known her for a few years and thinks she's perfect for him.
He seems happy, sighed Dottie. Marshall told me I would like her. Beyond that, he said she's a surprise.
Do we even know her name? Wondered Everett.
Nope, answered Parker. He took a deep breath.
Speaking of introductions, I should introduce everyone to Adriana. She's gracefully agreed to marry me tomorrow.
There were murmurs of congratulations and greetings around the room as Parker introduced each member of the family and how they were related to him. He ignored the empty seat beside his brother. It was unfortunate the hotel staff had not changed the seating plan to reflect Brittany's absence. The topic of Brittany was tactfully ignored as people congratulated Sterling and Jake on their impending nuptials. Parker had a glance at Gabe to see how his brother was taking the whole situation. While Gabe seemed a little quiet, he was making the effort. Parker reflected he was going to have to corner Gabe later to find out what he could do for him. Perhaps hiring him back at the hospital. With Gabe not inheriting his share of the family business, it was going to make things more difficult for running the hospital chain. Marshall might just have to step up to help out as well, now that James was officially retired. Their father, James, was going to prison. Sure, it was a minimum security hospital-type facility where everyone could visit him, but essentially it was prison. James wouldn't be able to leave of his own violation. Not that James was expected to live much longer with his health. Parker wasn't certain how to feel about the whole thing. There had always been a large measure of animosity between him and his father. When he was a kid, Parker had been confused and hurt by his father's attitude. Gabe was the favored child, spending time being groomed for the position of heir. Parker was barely tolerated, with an undercurrent of constant resentment, and Marshall ignored. When he was a teenager, Parker had decided there was no way to please the old man, and did whatever he wanted, within reason of not disappointing his mother. Dottie and his brothers had been the ones whom Parker had enjoyed a good relationship with. When he found out in school he had a knack for math, organization, and science, Parker had looked over what Gabe was doing and realized he would be good at it. Then it became a point of doing just as well as Gabe in the family business, even if Parker had not been the one trained for it by their dad. Then the truth hit him. It wasn't like anyone in the family outright told him. It was all the little things Parker had discovered along the way. The snubs from Mary, the extra attention from Oscar, the fact his father had been traveling about the time Parker should have been conceived. He liked to surf, as did Gerrit and Nate. People often commented on how Nate and Parker looked so much alike. They should look alike, Parker had often commented. They were cousins. Gabe and Gerrit looked alike, but no one really remarked upon that fact. However, it explained perfectly the animosity James harbored toward his middle son. Parker had struggled with the idea. Then he had asked Dottie, who had tearfully confirmed it. He wasn't James's son. In a moment of weak indiscretion, after imbibing a little too much alcohol, Dottie had a one-night stand with Oscar, his uncle. Oscar, his father. Parker had come to accept this truth. He had also come to accept the fact that no one in the family told the truth out loud. It was like they could all keep pretending as long as no one said a word about it. It was interesting how the Rameslys family had started to include some of his Uncle David's illegitimate children into the family fold with the Colburn brothers, yet everyone ignored Parker's roots. Did it really matter? Parker supposed it didn't. Either way, he was in the family, a part of the family business, doing work he loved, and soon what was between him and James would be a thing of the past. It wasn't like he wanted things to be this way. If Parker could open some sort of constructive dialogue, some sort of healing conversation with the man who had raised him, Parker would. However, the one time he had tried, James had leveled him with a look of pure loathing. James had hated that Parker knew. While he could forgive Dottie, James would never forgive Parker. So Parker had stopped trying. His phone chirped a text reply. Parker pulled out his phone and checked it. "Running a little late. Tell the staff to send the food to my room. Sorry to disappoint Mom." Putting away the phone, Parker turned to Dottie. "Marshall can't make it for dinner, but promises to see you tonight." Dottie tutted. "Did he say anything about his bride?" "Sorry, no," relayed Parker. "I suppose I'll just have to have faith Marshall picks someone suitable for himself," sighed Dottie. "Tell Marshall his aunts Mary, Rachel, Beverly, and I are going to have tea in my suite tonight. He can come and chat with us at some point." "I will, right after dinner," promised Parker. He would also give Marshall a little piece of his mind for worrying their mother. Marshall should have set her mind at ease over his choice of bride already. "Would it be okay?" a soft voice beside him asked. Parker pulled his thoughts away from his errant brother and turned to Adriana. He had not been paying attention to the conversation on her side, a mistake on his part. He was supposed to be taking care of her and making sure she was at ease tonight. "I'm sorry I didn't quite catch that. Would what be okay?" Amber eyes looked at him before she shyly looked down again. "Your cousin, Elle, invited my mother and I to be with the woman of the family after dinner. She says it's so we can get to know each other better. I wonder if this is okay with you." Parker marveled that this was probably the longest Adriana had spoken to him. "Of course it's all right. I'm happy you would like to learn more about my family." "Thank you," softly replied Adriana. "It's very kind of her to ask." Parker nodded. Soon enough, the meal was wrapped up, and the ladies were leaving to deal with some sort of dress emergency, according to Elle. Parker gave Adriana an encouraging smile as she glanced at him before following the group of ladies. The aunts and Dottie excused themselves to have a quiet evening together. Dottie reminded him to tell Marshall where she was, as she expected her son to visit her. Parker easily agreed, and quickly sent out a text to his brother. It wasn't often Parker got the opportunity to hang out with all of his cousins and brothers anymore. The men decided to talk shop in a private room off the bar. Everyone wanted updates on the current FBI investigation into their businesses and the state of everyone's finances, since many of their businesses and personal accounts had been frozen from the investigation. Parker was curious if there was any new information. He also didn't know exactly what to say about James. James had been the one to turn his brothers in to the FBI. He had come forward to clear his conscience and broker a deal for himself since he wanted to protect the hospital chain he owned. James had started this whole mess. Not that anyone besides Gabe, Parker, Marshall, and Dottie knew this. Another family secret. Parker felt like the secrets were starting to pile up. Add Gerrit taking some drug from the hospital that wasn't his to take. Well, it just seemed to get murkier and murkier in this family. Parker resolved to have a private word with his cousin this weekend. So far, Gerrit had been avoiding his calls. Parker wasn't going to let this go without an answer. There was no reason Gerrit would need to have access to any of the medications at Rameslys Hospital and Medical Corporation. Worst case scenario, Gerrit had a substance abuse issue and had grabbed the wrong medication in error, thinking it would give him a high or relief from pain. Perhaps that was what had happened. Years ago in college, Gerrit, Nate, and Parker had been surfing some dangerous waves during spring break. Parker had decided to pack it in, knowing the ocean was too extreme that day. He had been waiting on the shore for Nate and Gerrit, when Nate had returned alone. It had taken them precious minutes to find Gerrit, then even longer to swim out to him using their boards. Gerrit had been clinging to his, in serious pain. A wave had hit hard. He had lost his balance, and his board had hit his back. It had taken nearly all Parker's energy to get Gerrit to the beach with the help of Nate. Calling for help, eventually an ambulance arrived, carting the injured Gerrit to a third-rate hospital. The country they were visiting had good tourism, yet had poor infrastructure. Gerrit had broken his back in multiple places, as Parker recalled. A skilled surgeon did what he could to stabilize him, and soon Parker had arranged for Gerrit to be medically evacuated back home, to one of the family hospitals where he would get top care. Gerrit had been lucky. He could still walk. He didn't have full range of movement, but over 80%. He still suffered from constant back pain and flare-ups. It was one of the reasons he had not been a pallbearer for his brother Nate. It would simply be too much for him. For a man who had been very athletic, it would be challenging to now live constrained. Gerrit might very well have a drug problem, reflected Parker. It wasn't like he and his cousin were close anymore. Things change over time, and chronic pain could be difficult to live with. Best case scenario, someone had asked Gerrit to get the needed medication. It was plausible. Gerrit looked a lot like Gabe. An attending or resident could have thought that he was Gabe and asked for the meds. Unusual, but not impossible. However, there was no reason for Gerrit to know the code to the dispensary, nor did Parker know why Gerrit had been in the hospital that day. If security had not noticed the video footage and alerted Parker about it, they might not have known anything about the incident at all. Parker had immediately tightened security and changed the codes at all the hospitals. This wasn't going to happen again under his watch. Parker had a look at Gerrit, deliberately sitting across the table from him. Gerrit seemed his usual grumpy self. He didn't appear to have any signs of drug use. He wasn't underweight. He wasn't tired-looking. His hygiene was good. Parker frowned. He knew that many people managed to lead high-functioning lives, even as addicts. There weren't always signs to be seen. Gerrit looked up from his phone. His eyes met Parker's steadily. Dismissing him, Gerrit turned his attention to the conversation at hand. Parker supposed he ought to be paying better attention as well. Rameslys Pharma is tight, Noah was saying. Michael and Ann have been putting some of his savings from his inheritance from our grandfather into the company. Many of our shareholders are foregoing their portion of draws this year. There'll be no dividends. Stock values are down, which is no surprise. We have had a few offers to sell certain assets at a significant loss to our competitors. The lawyers have cautioned against this, because they believe the profits from such sales would simply be frozen and not allowed to be used for cash flow purposes for the company anyways. How long can your company hold out? Questioned Jake. Maybe 3 more months, shrugged Noah. We're still profitable. We just can't access our accounts. In 3 months, we have a number of supplier contracts coming due and can't continue without accessing more cash. Michael is keeping up payroll and the smaller expenses. Otherwise, our workers would be walking by now. I could put in something, offered Max. Noah shook his head. Drop in the bucket. You're not rich enough. Besides, if push comes to shove, Elle and the kids might be moving in with you or Michael. With only Elle's salary, we have let the nanny go and are barely paying the bills. It's a vicious cycle. Have the FBI given any indication when they're going to wrap this investigation up? When we can gain control of our assets again? Wondered Jake. Sterling has been trying to find out information for us, but she hasn't been able to make much progress. Nothing definite, replied a grim Everett. Bree has been trying to talk to Agent Kepler about the investigation since she and Kepler have a history. However, he is currently keeping silent. We did have word that something might happen soon, though. A source said there might be new charges. New charges? Inquired Ben with a frown. Yeah, no idea what they might be, though, revealed Everett. We should know soon enough if the source is right. They indicated it would come shortly after the holidays. Good, said Dillon quietly. Good,
questioned a surprised Max. Why would that be good?
Dylan sighed.
I'm tired of living with this over our heads. If the FBI would just charge us, we could properly fight the charges, assuming we can still afford lawyers. It beats living in limbo, waiting for the worst to come.
Right now, I'm happy for the reprieve, commented Jake. At least Sterling and I have a little more time.
Can they even do this? Inquired Henry. Is it even legal to just freeze our assets, nearly put us out of business, and not charge anyone? The lawyers are fighting it, but it's the FBI, stated Jake. They have some clout. Plus, warrants and court orders were legally obtained, and they did charge our fathers. We all just happen to be collateral damage.
How is Rameslys Insurance situated? Asked Henry.
Not good. Jake ran a hand through his hair. We are at a negative cash flow. Everett has managed to help prop us up for payroll and day-to-day expenses, but we need to access far more money to pay out claims. We are having an underwriting loss this year, and with the weather in the south acting up, there have been issues. Normally, we could easily pull from the reserves to cover them, but this isn't a normal situation. Since we haven't found anyone willing to join our now reputation-damaged company, to take over Jake's old position as he transitioned to take Dad's spot at head of the company, I will be continuing on temporarily to help, noted Everett. As much as I would like to resign and pursue some other things, I plan on staying until we can get through this.
We appreciate it, Everett. A tired Dylan spoke.
Especially if the worst happens, it will be good to have someone we trust to take over, muttered Jake. If we get arrested, or can't keep up with the bills, Kelly and the kids are going to need some help, mentioned Dylan.
No one is getting arrested, inserted Max.
Don't patronize, spoke Dylan a little sharply. There'll be large fines which we can manage if our accounts are returned to us. Plus, someone will be hung out to dry. It might be a minimum security prison for 10 years or so. It's Noah, Jake, Gabe, Gerrit, and myself who are most at risk. Are they investigating you, Henry?
I haven't been notified of any investigation, admitted Henry.
Then you're likely in the clear, noted Dylan. Or perhaps the FBI has no jurisdiction since you were in another country.
Dylan, you don't need to worry about Kelly, said Everett. Since he was sitting beside his brother, Everett put a hand on Dylan's shoulder. I will help.
Dylan had a weary laugh. You should know that Josh is staying with us now. His mother went back into rehab again, and his father's working out of state.
Wow, muttered Noah.
Yeah, nodded Dylan. It's been an adjustment.
Don't worry about it, assured Everett. I'm happy to help out.
How's the hotel chain? Questioned Jake, trying to change the subject so Dylan would be distracted from his fears. Agent Kepler took a tour of our offices and confiscated a bunch of our financial files, mentioned Gerrit. Fortunately, I always keep an extra copy of everything. The data shows extensive money being laundered through Rameslys hotels, which is no surprise. As you know, my father was arrested trying to leave the country. Dad was a little lax in his management skills, leaving Nate and I to manage the company most of the time. And there have been an unexplained income into the company and a consistent payout to a subsidiary company of Rameslys Pharmaceuticals. I had already started an audit long before the FBI became involved, and had been setting aside funds to cover whatever the consequences might be, since I became suspicious as soon as I realized Uncle David was involved. My lawyers have approached the FBI, the mayor, and the DA's office with the offer to repay the illicit funds, negotiate an acceptable fine, and an assurance of testimony against Dad. With that offer, should it be accepted, and a liquidation of some of our underperforming hotels, plus the income from the Asian chain, Rameslys Hotels should survive. We won't be making a profit anytime soon, but we are salvageable.
Wow, breathed Noah. You're going to testify against Uncle Oscar.
Gerrit and I agreed that it was likely the only way to keep the North American side of the business operating. There are thousands of staff and their families who depend on us, dryly mentioned Henry. We don't like it. In fact, I would rather do anything else than testify, but Dad was involved. We cannot get away from that fact. He was aware it was happening, even if he wasn't actively involved in the drug running. I hope with our testimony he might get a lighter sentence, and Gerrit can clear his own name. Addison is essentially viewed as an employee of the chain since she isn't an active member of the board. Thankfully, we believe Addison and her assets are currently safe from the investigation. Testifying against your own father is pretty cold, mentioned Noah with a grimace. Would you testify against Dad? Wondered Max. I mean, I don't like the idea, but if I had evidence against him and the authorities asked, I would testify. He did what they're accusing him of. I suppose I just feel like family loyalty is important, sighed Noah. I guess if I had to, I should, but I wouldn't want to. The FBI can convict Dad without me. What about you, Michael? Would you testify if you could against Uncle David? Asked Jake. It's a bit of a rhetorical question, considering what each of us might do. Our dad is pleading guilty, so Everett, Dillon, and I won't have to testify. Everyone turned their attention to Michael, who tried to say something, then gave an irritated shrug. He made a motion with his hand to Max. No idea what you mean, said Max as he shook his head. Michael had lost most of his ability to communicate through speech and written language after a tumor was removed from his brain during surgery shortly before he and Anne had married, leaving him with a condition called speech aphasia. The majority of the time, Max or Noah could interpret what Michael meant. However, occasionally, even they were at a loss. Dad put Michael wrongfully in jail. For that alone, anyone who has any information to put Dad in prison, I'm all for it. Point taken, noted Noah begrudgingly. I revise my opinion and agree with Max. How is the hospital business going? Asked Ben, trying to move the subject along before anyone had any hard feelings. Are there any issues with the accounting or the FBI? Parker and Gabe shared a look before Gabe responded. Before Dad resigned, he gave a full accounting to the FBI, repaid the full amount of money laundered through RHMC, and made a plea deal for himself. After New Year's, he will be admitted to a minimum medical prison facility. Considering he has cancer, Dad does not expect to ever leave the facility. We are waiting for the courts to determine how large of a fine our company is obligated to pay. Once we know that, we will be able to evaluate our position better. Is Agent Kepler investigating you at all? Frowned Everett. If he is, Kepler has not come out and said anything, prevaricated Gabe. Dad gave them full access to all his private accounts as well, and did his best to make sure the FBI understood Parker, Marshall, and I had nothing to do with the money laundering. Dad also agreed to testify against David, Robert, and Oscar. Everyone digested that news for a moment. Michael gave Gabe and Parker a considering look. Parker wondered if Michael was contemplating the timing of the deal. Perhaps Michael suspected James Rameslys had approached the FBI earlier than Gabe was implying. Everyone else seemed to accept the story at face value, not knowing James had been the one who had set the FBI investigation into motion. The moment was interrupted by a phone ringing. Who has their phone on? Groaned Everett. Parker, we just discussed this at supper. Not me, defended Parker, slightly indignant that Everett automatically assumed it was him since Parker was the one who had texted at dinner. I'm the guilty one. Henry pulled the offending cell phone out of his pocket, glancing at the screen. I have to take this. Getting up, Henry answered the phone and left the room. Ben leaned forward. Who needs an influx of cash soon? Personal or professional, I'm offering. Are you sure? Inquired Dillon. You shouldn't have to put your business at risk for us, Ben. My business will be fine, answered Ben. I already pushed some funds around, made everything a bit more liquid in anticipation of this weekend. I can cover the Rameslys family businesses while we get things sorted out. There's no reason for any of you to go personally bankrupt or to lose the companies. Employees, suppliers, and customers are counting on us. Once you see the numbers, you might think differently, warned Jake. It could also be a few years before we could even start repaying you back. I'm not worried about it. Ben dismissed Jake's concerns. Send me the relevant paperwork and I'll make sure we stay in business. Only if you're certain about this, quietly said Noah. I hate asking for help, but we need it. The only other way is if the FBI releases their stranglehold on us, and it doesn't seem like they have any intention of doing that anytime soon. I admit, It would be a relief to have some financial breathing room, stated Dylan. If you can provide it, I would be very grateful, Ben. Ben nodded. How about I buy a round? Now that sounds like a great idea, said a grinning Marshall as he entered the room, one arm slung around Henry. Guess who I found in the hall? You guys forget Henry's back and didn't invite him? Very funny, mentioned Henry with a wry smile. Hey, it's about time you showed, grumbled Parker, even though he was happy to see his brother had arrived. Are you going to be late to the altar as well? The group descended into good-natured ribbing, the serious talk shelved for the rest of the night as they discussed the upcoming weddings.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Wedding, Book 10 of the Rameslys Brothers series. If you enjoy listening to this video, consider liking, sharing, or putting in a comment. All of these things help with the algorithms of my channel to get exposure. They're free for you to do, and they help me out a lot. Thank you, and happy listening.